Sunday morning. What's going on in Albany? With us today is Jesse Arm, and he's the Executive Director of External Affairs and Chief of Staff at the Manhattan Institute. Well, Jesse, what the heck is going on in Albany?
Well, John, the latest out of Albany and the governor's race for who will be next to lead New York State is that Antonio Delgado, who is Kathy Hochul's lieutenant governor, has dropped out, leaving Hochul no challenger from the progressive side of the aisle or in the Democratic Party altogether on her way to returning for another 4 years in the governor's mansion. It's a remarkable development. It's a very different place from where Hochul was just a few months ago. She has a couple of policy wins to hang her hat on now. Elise Stefanik exited the race for the office. Her lieutenant governor dropped her challenge against her. And now she has a pretty clear pathway, at least to the general election against Nassau County Executive Bruce Blakeman, but possibly all the way to 4 more years in the office.
And challenges. It's some of the polls that have come out so far. It puts her in the lead. Do you think it's just an early lead, or do you think that it's pretty much at a pulse?
Well, I think the Democratic primary is pretty much a done deal. Something that's really striking is that the progressive lane or the far left lane never consolidated behind Hochul's lieutenant governor, Delgado, who launched a challenge against her. Even Zohran Mamdani, the mayor of New York City, who theoretically could have mobilized a left coalition against Hochul, ended up returning the favor that she did for him in his electoral campaign and endorsed her instead of Delgado. And that really tells you something important. It's that the activist left talks revolution, but when push comes to shove, they often choose the incumbent who shows some signs of being able to govern and win, or at least that tells you something about Mamdani and the way he's operating. Hochul has threaded this needle, progressive enough, rhetorically tough enough on affordability and safety to look, I guess, competent enough to not have any kind of meaningful ideological contrast running against her in the primary race. So voters seem to, at least on the Democratic side, have made their choice, and it's one for stability.
Understand. And the convention was this week with Bruce Blakeman. It looks like he's cruising to the nomination, and I guess he has to get started. And at what point do you think we'll be able to have a pulse of who really is in the lead?
Well, in December, Representative Elise Stefanik, who was the favorite in this race for a while, her Republican campaign for governor sought to capitalize on her national profile, her aggressive style, her great camera presence, and close relationship with President Trump. In December, she dropped out of the race, and that was a very competitive race. We saw even some polling that showed Stefanik and Hochul neck and neck. And before that, you had Mike Lawler, the congressman from the Hudson Valley area, who was looking at getting into the contest. With Blakeman, we haven't seen a ton of polling to date that shows the race as competitive, but it's still very, very early. There have been some interesting policy fights that you might not expect that have broken out already. Hochul, for example, endorsed the idea of one conductor on MTA train lines being required only, that you don't need to have two. And this is something that public sector unions have long opposed and said that for public safety reasons and for labor reasons, you should really have 2 train conductors. This is something that Blakeman came out and said he is on the opposite side of Hochul on. He says you do need 2. So there are interesting policy splits that aren't always predictable shaking out in this race, but it's going to be a very difficult environment for Republicans nationally in 2026. So it's a tough race here in New York. Lee Zeldin came very close to defeating Kathy Hochul 4 years ago, and it looks like it's going to be an uphill climb for Blakeman to replicate that kind of success and campaign with a real promise. But nothing is impossible, of course.
Bruce Blakeman got the nomination this week. Governor Hochul has been the governor. So I think we give it 90 days at least and see which way it goes and see when they both have they're out there talking. Let's see which way the pulse is going.
Absolutely. You gotta wait and see with these things. But Hochul's position today is far improved from where it was just a couple of weeks ago, and you do have to lend her some credit for that. Kudos is due where it is due on housing policy issues, on cell phone bans in schools. Hochul has made some decisions that are in fact popular, and she has sort of changed her standing in the electorate's eyes. She was held responsible for that underperformance relative to Lee Zeldin 4 years ago, and drew the ire of a lot of Democrats nationally. She was one of the least popular governors in the country. She has improved her standing significantly, and Republicans are now going to have to get creative with mounting a campaign against her. The shape of the race looks very different today than it did a couple of months ago when it was going to be Elise Stefanik who was projected to be at the top of the ticket. That's for sure.
Jesse Arm, Manhattan Institute, thank you so much for coming on this Sunday morning and giving all our listeners the heads up of what the heck is going on, and we'll talk again real soon.
Great to be with you, John.